Okay, I'll admit it. When I first saw Shimoneta, I judged the absolute hell out of it. But really, can you blame me? I mean, between the ecchi tag and the girl with panties on her head on the poster, I was immediately turned off. Insert book cover judging cliches here. There's one thing you should know about me. I don't learn lessons. Bottom line is, I initially decided to pass on Shimoneta. Only until I saw the praise pouring in did I finally say, you know what, I'll give it a shot. 12 episodes and more WTF moments than I can count later, I left Shimoneta with the same question I went into it with. What the fuck am I watching? Of course, I mean that in the best and dirtiest possible way. Today, under the scope, I take a look at Shimoneta, a boring world where the concept of dirty jokes doesn't exist. An absolutely outrageous anime that will surely have you asking yourself, what the fuck are you watching? While Shimoneta may come off as an otaku-pandering, fan service-laden, cringe-worthy comedy, by the end of the first episode, it's clearly not what you're used to. Shimoneta eschews the boring, generic plotline I thought I was gonna get for one that's actually enticing and meaningful. Not to mention absolutely hilarious in the most insane way imaginable. Sometime in the future, Japan has instituted a law banning all coarse and dirty language, media, etc. from the country. Something that the show's title does a good and surprisingly specific job of explaining. A couple decades later, Tanukichi Okuma enrolls in the country's most morally upright, or uptight, school in hopes of attracting his crush, the perfectly pure student council president Anna blah blah blah. Things take a turn for the interesting, of course, when the eccentric Ayame Kajo, aka Blue Snow, ropes him into the freedom-fighting terrorist group self-proclaimed as SOCS, in hopes of giving dirty jokes back to the world. Shimoneta has a bevy of valuable life lessons to teach you, such as how to make your own sex toy, how to beat it without using your hands, and how to give your baked goods that extra kick. Oh, and there's something about the dangers of censorship thrown in there too. In all seriousness, Shimoneta actually does provide an interesting message about the problems with censorship, albeit in a very over-the-top way. Things like freedom of speech, freedom of the press, and basic sex education are all highly important parts of society at the heart of basic human rights. Don't believe me? Just look at Shimoneta's portrayal of a society without these rights. Hell, high school students don't even know how babies are made. I'm sure they find out at some point for basic human preservation purposes, but that's another matter. It's one of the most unique mashups of genres I've ever seen. Seriously, what comes to mind when you think dystopian? Dark, grim, totalitarian oppression with works like Fahrenheit 451 and George Orwell's 1984. You know what doesn't come to mind? Ecchi and dirty jokes. The combination, however, works surprisingly well. The semi-meaningful plot of a dystopian, coupled with the lewd and obscene comedy, makes for a frankly ridiculous story that works to hilarious effect. Of course, as with any comedy, a lot of it depends on your sense of humor. In Shimoneta's case, though, this is even more pronounced. Obviously, if dirty jokes aren't your thing, there's a chance the show will come off as nothing but uncomfortable and cringeworthy. Even so, I wouldn't write it off just yet. You might be surprised by how much you enjoy the comedy like I was. After all, this is typically not my style of humor, but the absolute insanity of some of the situations had me laughing so hard I couldn't breathe. Sure, it's not always great, it's definitely hit or miss at times, but the hits more than made up for the occasional misses. I can definitely imagine how someone might be turned off by it, though. Shimoneta tries to make its point about censorship, but the constant barrage of sexual humor may get in the way of that if you don't enjoy said dirty jokes. It can certainly be overbearing to say the least, and if it isn't your style, there's a good chance you won't love the series. Like most comedies, it's one of those half endings where it kinda wraps up the story, but leaves a lot left unanswered. The last episode was more of an OVA than anything. Still, I don't watch a comedy for a deep, engaging plotline, which it did have, mind you. I watch it for laughs, something Shimoneta provided in spades. As is usual in comedies, the success of the show largely rides on the success of its characters. After all, if the characters are dull, chances are the humor will be too. Thankfully for Shimoneta, this isn't a problem, as the cast is largely excellent. The star of the show is Kajo, with her crazy, wild personality and propensity to whip out a dirty joke at every turn. She's the driver of the plot and the heart of the series. Other characters may provide plenty of laughs with their equally eccentric personalities, but Kajo is what makes the show go. Anna is probably next up on the list, as the turn her character takes after episode 3 makes for some of the biggest what the fuck moments in the entire series. And trust me, that's saying something. In case her love nectar and willingness to murder anyone who stands in the way of her love, or I guess I should say, her love's purity, Anna is as yandere as it gets. She also serves as the clearest illustration of the detrimental effect censorship has had on this society. Initially this paragon of innocence and purity, Anna's ignorance of how relationships and sex really works leads her off the deep end when she can't distinguish lust from love, or really what any of it means. She's so clueless, she doesn't even know what inappropriate is. Other notable characters include the creepy stalker girl determined to find the secret behind reproduction, the gorilla dude who gives the show the yaoi injection it desperately needs, and the girl who's shaped like a penis. No, seriously. Of course, the cast has its bad pieces as well. You may have noticed I haven't mentioned our MC yet. Okuma is your typical protagonist dragged along and forced against his will by insert female character here to progress the plot. With no real defining characteristics, Okuma is easily the lowlight of an otherwise great cast. I also really didn't care for the erotic artist girl with the annoying voice, but she was minor enough it didn't bother me that much. All in all, Shimoneta's crazy roster of personalities makes the comedy as strong as it is. It may not be perfect, but like the jokes themselves, it's got enough bright spots to make up for any bad, and the character interactions, particularly those between Kajo and Okuma, are extremely well done. There's not much else to say animation-wise other than it's J.C.Staff. What does that mean? Solid, consistent animation that won't blow you away by any means but won't leave you scratching your head. One of the funniest and most ironic things about Shimoneta is its self-censorship. All of the dirty words are bleeped out with lewd noises, and obscene gestures are blacked out with a different stamp for each character. It's clearly done on purpose and is a nice little touch that often makes the jokes stick out even more. Considering I watched it in sub, it actually added a great deal. In terms of the soundtrack, it's your typical comedy OST, meaning perfectly fine but unmemorable background music that fits the situation. You've got your tracks for the lighter, funnier moments, and your tracks for the crazier, action-packed moments. The voice acting was exceptional. Each voice actor reflected their character's personality, and the wide range of voices almost perfectly matched the versatility of the cast. Like most comedies, Shimoneta's animation and sound won't make you say wow, but seeing as how the story and characters already do plenty of that, it's okay. If you're still unsure about Shimoneta, thinking it's just too immature and pandering for your tastes, I urge you to reconsider. There's a surprisingly minimal amount of fan service, and unlike most shows nowadays, it's rarely, if ever, in poor taste. It's used for comedic effect, not to give the self-insert weebs of the world raging hard-ons. There's also no sign of harem tropes or anything of that nature, despite the majority female cast. The humor isn't in the lewdness of the jokes themselves, but rather the insanity of the whole thing. Shimoneta is a show that will undoubtedly have you wondering just what the fuck you're watching, and I mean that in the best possible way. Even with everything I've said, I know it still isn't for everybody, not by a long shot. But my point is that even if you think you won't like it, I urge you to at least give it a try. So with that, I give Shimoneta an approval rating of, well, try, as well as an overall score of 3.9 love nectar cookies out of 5. Tasty. This is a perfect example of my recommendation not always matching up with the score. The approval rating is essentially how much would I recommend this series. In Shimoneta's case, I don't think it's a good idea for a younger audience, and it's entirely dependent on your sense of humor. So it gets a try because it's not for everybody, but I think it's still worth you giving it a shot. The overall score, on the other hand, is the more objective rating of how good I think the show is based on enjoyment, story, characters, etc. Even if I only gave Shimoneta a try, I think it's hilarious, wonderfully written, and a highly enjoyable watch. It's a really good comedy and fully deserves the relatively high score I gave it. If you're looking for something similar to Shimoneta, I point you towards Seitokai Yakuin Domo for another school comedy with a focus on the lewd and lascivious. Also check out Panty and Stocking with Garter Belt for an extremely untraditional anime that's more akin to Western animation and again has similar humor. And that's all for me. For an explanation of the rating system, look in the description. If you're feeling particularly generous and want to help me make better content, please consider checking out my Patreon page. Any help goes a long way. Shout out to J.C. Green for doing so already. It means a lot. Please subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and feel free to follow me on Twitter at UTS Reviews. As always, thanks for watching. See you next time.